house itself is a museum. How do you read it? How do you understand where the different parts of the house came from? When did they arrive? Why? How? What are the reasons behind them? I do want to stress that this is work in progress. Although my facts may be right, some of the interpretations may change, and some of the way I put the facts together may change. So over the next few weeks of enforced solitude, I hope I'm going to turn this into a more useful paper. The picture on the right actually comes from the origins of building paper, and we're going to be seeing a bit more of it as we go through the presentation. When we think about what is the standard, the house we expect, it actually, if you take the lining out, looks something a bit like this. This is the Clark's Mill shed near Oamaru, part of the Heritage New Zealand Category 1 Clark's Mill. And it's pretty obvious, you can see the light from outside. And that light brings with it wind. This is a house that was investigated by Mary O'Keefe of Heritage Solutions. The occupants of that, which fortunately had sarking lining, had attempted to keep the wind out, which blew through the cracks in the strip materials. And she was able to date the house from the illustrations of the magazine that had been used with it. But in simple terms, strip materials, the sort of weatherboard or cladding that we have on the outside, coupled with the then traditional sarking on the inside, meant that the outside wind could quite easily get inside. There was a growth of understanding around the 1860s in America that newspaper was a very good non-conductor, a good insulator that reduced the flow of heat. And so people started using the newspaper as ways to reduce heat loss. And of course, wrapping fish and chips, which is by far the most important thing you can do with it. So when we go to the Oxford English Dictionary, we find that what was originally called sheathing paper, which is something you think of a sheath for a knife or a sword, it's something that encases something else. And the first reference to it that the Oxford English Dictionary had dates to 1794, when in an article they talked about writing and printing paper, sheathing, wrapping paper. Building paper evolved from that, and I'll show you during the presentation how, but it was originally a heavy paper used by builders as a covering or lining material. And the first reference to that came in 1873, when building paper was in its youth. As part of my research, I've actually managed to find some slightly earlier references. Alexander Hamilton, in his report on manufactures in the United States, which in those days really meant the East Coast, talked about sheathing paper was necessary for military supply and shipbuilding. He was actually talking about not taxing it, whereas he was happy to tax other papers. Whereas building paper has its first formal outing as part of the Rock River Paper Company's patent building paper circular, although the term had been used in newspapers in 1869, referring to the Rock River Company's material. I want to make one more slight digression, and that is how tar and paper got linked together, because that is critical in understanding the story of building paper. In 1774, the first German mention of the use of tar and building paper, or paper, together to form a roofing, where it provided the opportunity to have a flat roof. It was then possibly covered with sand or gravel, but certainly by 1839, the Hosselment or wood cement based roofing was used a barrel making pitch, which is where the wood part of it comes from, and it was covered with sand and gravel. This allowed the use of a wide flat roof, and hence supported the evolution, the development of modernism with its use of flat or slightly pitched roofs. 1844 is reportedly the first US use of a pine tar impregnated wood and wood pitch roof, copied from wood construction in a small town on the Atlantic coast. By 1867, 23 years later, the report said that it abounded with specimens of pasteboard for roofing and lining rooms, with Prussia providing bituminous carton pierre, which, if I understand correctly, is the use of a papier-mâché material made to look like stone or metal, as well as pasteboards and other root paper for roofing. The Austrians also had bituminous and incombustible and impermeable roofing papers exhibited by a number of manufacturers. 1867 is a very important year in the life of building paper. It was when a number of things started to come together. The 1830s had seen the invention of the Four-Drineur paper-making machine. America had suffered through the Civil War, ending about 1865. By 1866 or 67, the groundwood process was in the States. 1867, the sulfite process was invented, although it took really until the 1880s for wide commercial use. But in late 1860s in Wisconsin, they had a number of things. They had straw, raw material for straw board. They had power in the form of the river going nearby, and I've already mentioned the Rock River, and we have an introduction to that river. And later, of course, they had steam driven by wood or coal. They had the technology to convert straw to a fiber, the soda process, which was a predecessor of the sulfate process and somewhat gentler on everyone. They had the technology. They had this machines to make heavy paper and pasteboard. They had transport. They had a way for the railways to move it to the market. And of course, the canals and the rivers could be used for shipping. They had a purpose. They had a lot of houses with what they call clapboards, what we call weatherboard, with the sarking inside. The drafts came through, as I've already pointed out. And of course, they had the invention of extensive advertising, the ability to create a market and promote the product. So, surprise, surprise, in 1868, the Beloit Strawboard Company and the Rocky River Paper Company merged together, forming the Rock River Paper Company. And the company, as in one of the founders, the Beloit Strawboard Company, made strawboards, made a lot of it. And they made this as a sheathing or as a cladding board and a roofing board. It was described as coarse yellow pasteboard, perhaps not unsurprising from straw, in rolls 32 inches, 0.8 of a meter to 48 inches or 1.2 meters wide. Very compact and firm with a straight, smooth edge and weighing about 1¼ pounds per square yard, 611 grams per square meter. Modern building paper is 100 to 150 grams per square meter, or for comparison, the paper we use in our photocopy machines is of the order of 80 grams per square meter. So you can see this is a heavy board. Its purpose to create warmer timber frame buildings, but it wasn't the paperboard we think of, the building paper we think of. This was a board effectively used as the cladding material. It just went on the outside, or if you preferred, on the inside of the building. It continued the use of green timber. It meant that the strong and chilly prairie winds were stopped. They didn't get inside the house. It was compact, solid, and had, most importantly, a very low price. It was far cheaper than the putting clapboards or weatherboards on the outside and a sarking on the inside. The Rock River Paper Company had a wide range of ideas and things developed, and their directors and agents over basically 2 or 3 years produced a large number of patents. These are the most important ones. The first one from Merrill, who was the president of the company, developed a machine that made the paper or the board that came out of it much drier by pressing it between rollers. Evans then took this and tarred it directly, which made it both waterproof and flammable, but its other advantage was it kept the rats and mice out because they didn't like the smell. Mr. Benjamin Field, who had been with the Beloit Straw Company, produced a patent for a fabric to cover roofs and the sides of buildings. This is the one patent I have not actually seen. I've seen references to it, but it appears to be missing from the US Patent Office database. Merrill produced a patent for the rolled straw board. And this is, in some ways, what the Rock River Paper Company claimed to be their greatest invention. We'll come back to it in a minute. Field and Smith produced a roofing based on this product using bitumen and silica to saturate it and create a less flammable product. Mr. Cobb added to this a layer of sand and gravel, perhaps the ancestor of the modern American flat roof, which nowadays tends to be more made of butanol rather than paper. And then Mr. Hale, who we'll come back to later, was the New York agent for the company, designed improved sheathing boards that built on Merrill's rolled straw board. On the right, we've got Hale's paper product patent illustration showing where this amazing product could be used throughout the house. And then the Rock River Paper Company started to promote it. They put out an annual circular, and I've been very fortunate to find 3 copies of their circular. The 1869, the first one, and it says inside it's the first one, which the Canadian Centre for Architecture has. The 1870, the one in the middle, the Winterthur Library had a copy. And lastly, the 1877, the Lincoln Presidential Library had a copy. And I was even more fortunate to have a colleague in Springfield, Illinois, who went in and took copies of it for me. And you can see the picture in the center here that was on my early slide. This is the house that they used to promote their sales. Although after 8 years, they'd gone to a much more sophisticated house. Instead of just being a simple, what looks to be 2 up, 2 down, they'd gone to a much more decorative and impressive house. And you'll notice that they go from having 1 mill and the base at 13 LaSalle Street in Chicago to having 2 mills in Beloit and Marshall, Michigan. And they still had their 2 mills, but now they've moved to much bigger premises by 1877. Plus their patented red cedar carpet lining, which was made at the same factory and used cedar board for its properties, anti-insect properties. Where did this invention really come from? Well, this is Merrill's illustration on the left from his patent, and I have to say I cannot see the difference between the 2 illustrations, but I'm sure there must be some there. According to their 1870 circular, they received an order in spring 1868, so I guess that's about this time of year, for 10 tons of straw boards, 4 to 4.3 meters long, for cheese boxes. They couldn't make it that long and transport it, so they suggested rolling it. But how did you roll it? And so they decided the way to do it was to roll, or to start the rolling of the board as it came out on a large cylinder. So very quickly they ended up with a process that would allow them to make very long lengths of a board. Clearly there's a limited market for cheese boxes, and according to the company, I want to stress this is their story, they decided it would be good to cover the sides of buildings. But instead of having a product that just laid over, they decided to make it as wide as the studs, and it became the thing. This was going to keep houses warm. So they also invented this is Evans, again, member of the committee, or the company, invented a way of putting indented grooves down the side of the board so you could put them inside the building. And this is, so the outside of the building is here. You've got your sheathing board here, a dead airspace here, and then, of course, you've got your lath and plaster to cover it. Or alternatively, you could put it on the outside. What I find interesting about this illustration is you'll see that they are using what now would be plywood, but then they used a strip board to provide an external cladding, and then over the top of that, they put the weatherboard. Well, they were very successful, and the picture in the background is this map taken from their circulars showing how they grew. In 1865, their testimonials came from this area, going around Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan. By 1870, they were well and truly stretched out and going much further distances, although New York is just outside here. By 1877, they're going out here. They didn't always increase the number of testimonials, but what they did say is it's gone to Hudson's Bay in the north, the Gulf on the south, the Atlantic east, and the Pacific west. So by 1877, roughly 8 years after this product had been invented, it was being used throughout the entire United States. Other people in Beloit were also making building paper. F.N. Davis, or Francis Davis, had 3 patents, but his most important was he treated it with alum, or potassium aluminium sulfate, or aluminum sulfate, which made it fireproof. And by 1879, we're talking 2 years after that illustration from the Rock River Company, he had factories in Cologne, Prussia, and in London, England. 1875, he changed his name, and the company's name, and its Chicago agent was Barrett, Arnold, and Kemble, which later became the Barrett division of Honeywell and Company, continuing to make building paper. Further inventions were happening around the building paper line. In Attleboro, Massachusetts, Sisalcraft was invented, a layer of craft paper, asphalt, a sisal fiber, which is a little bit like the fiber we get from New Zealand native flax, and then another layer of craft and asphalt. A similar product, although lacking the asphalt, was Cabot's quilt, and paper eelgrass paper product a few years later that was used for insulation. Sisalcraft came from the Paper Products Company. A man called Charles Howard was the principal inventor, but by the 1920s, George Gibbs was developing much improved machines and ways of making it. Some people may know the name Sackett. Augustus Sackett also invented a paper product, but he had a 3-ply product, a paper felt paper product. He patented the product and the machine, and it was available in New Zealand in 1888, just 4 years after that machine had been patented. Of course, he was really well known for his 1894 plasterboard patent, or Sackett Board, which became available in New Zealand in the early 1900s. The OK Bituminous Building Company also used a multiple ply product, but they tried saturating the paper with silicate of soda to make it non-inflammable. And they patented a number of machines and ways of achieving this. The paper production was such that building paper, which is the red dots here, starts very small. Unfortunately, or fortunately, it didn't start getting into the statistics until 1890. Remember, we're inventing this 1869, so 20 years later, it's actually big enough to be in the statistics. And this here, the bars in the background are the percentage of the building paper as part of the sorry, I'm just being hassled, which is part of the percentage of building paper is of the total market, which remained of the order of 4 to 5% over this period. And you can see here, total paper production is growing, but so is building paper. Why is building paper growing? Well, perhaps that comes in this story, which is the amount of money they're getting paid. Even during the Depression, building paper was getting good value for money, so that it was a profitable product for the mills to make and sell. I want to end with just a quick review of what was happening in New Zealand. The earliest advertising I found so far for Sackett sheathing paper is 1888, but in the early 1900s, a number of patent trademarks were made. 1941, we have the Duroid Company building its Melthoid factory in Onehunga. It took until 1944 to get this into the building code. 1964 continued, 1978 it continued, and nowadays it is still in there, although its purpose has changed hugely from what it was originally invented for. It was originally invented to keep the wind out. Now it's part of the moisture management we have in our buildings. When I started this exercise, I thought this would be the family tree of building paper. It would start with sheathing, which became plywood sheathing, widely used in America. It would beget building paper, which become tar and fire resistant, which in turn would beget building wraps, and we get the synthetic wraps. In fact, the family tree looks more like this. The sheathing continues as plywood, but building paper in tar and fire resistant paper are almost the same time, and the building wraps follow on from that. So there's some interesting work yet to be done on creating this family tree. For the future, I want to look at the locations of hydropower, the patent review, the different types of paper types, and the innovations they were making. So there, I think it's time for me to finish and just acknowledge the people who helped and open it up to other people.